Well, thank you for coming. My name is Larry Jaffee. This next Wednesday, I will be celebrating my 4th month as a Reykjavik resident. So it's very big. And, you know, this library is very special to me. Because I have to tell you, like, my first trip here was in March 2024. I arrived at midnight right across the street. My Airbnb was a few blocks away, and it was pouring rain. I was like, welcome to Iceland. You know. So then, the next morning, the sun was shining. I see the mountains, I see the snow, and I'm like, I could get used to this place. Now, I lived in Manhattan, and I know there are a few New Yorkers here. How many of you are originally from the New York area? Okay. So, and you know, I was able to get out of the concrete jungle. So, what drew me to Iceland was the music, right from the start. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. The first part of this is about the vinyl comeback, which is something that I've dedicated my career since 2016. I mean, I was always a record collector, but I went in a big way in 2016 when I realized that there was something of a rebirth happening. So yeah, how did vinyl get resurrected from oblivion to become a deluxe product? Now, I had 3 theories going into this. And I should say, a lot of my presentation, the first part of it, is based on my book, Record Store Day, The Most Improbable Comeback of the 21st Century. Unfortunately, they never got the European distribution together. So I wish I could say you can buy it at your local, or order it from your local bookstore. The bookshops here are fantastic, by the way, in this city, as are the record stores. I'm standing here with Jack White. He had given me an essay for the book. And you know, his motto was, your turntable is not dead. And I'll talk a little bit more about Jack later. So, but I was given the opportunity to write this book in 2020. And at that stage, you know, I realized that I missed vinyl. You know, I had already rebuilt my collection. I sold my collection in 2010. Within 2 years, I realized what a colossal mistake that was. And then I spent the next 10 years rebuilding it to its former glory. And then what I did again, in preparation of my move, I sold half of the collection. I sold 2,000 LPs to help pay for the move. Yeah. And then there's 2,000 LPs in a storage space in the Bronx. But anyway, my first job, sort of in the music business, was editing a magazine called Media Line, which covered mostly CD and DVD production. And when I really contemplated why vinyl came back, it was the CD, actually, which never is given enough credit. Because when you think about it, CDs got people to rebuy what they already owned on LP and paid almost twice as much money. Like the LPs, at least in the US, like $7.98 or so for like a new album. And then all of a sudden this new CD thing comes and it's like $16.98 or even more sometimes. And then the other thing is something called FOMO, which is actually, I guess, in fashion as well, fear of missing out, like this limited edition. Sneakers is like a big deal. Is that true here in Iceland? Yeah.
Nike, yeah.
Comic books also do that. And then the pandemic created a new hobby. And I saw this actually firsthand. I had a girlfriend who had a teenage daughter who loved Billie Eilish, and she graduated junior high school, so I got her the new Billie Eilish record. The kid was beside herself. How does this thing work? And luckily, her uncle gave her mother a Christmas gift of a record player. So she couldn't wait to like see how it worked, and you know. So I realized actually during the pandemic, people were home, bored out of their mind, and they got out of the attic or basement, the dusty old turntable that they inherited from their mother or something, and they started buying records from Amazon, probably. So Jack was actually, the book came out, and this is true. Record Store Day in 2022 was on my birthday, April 23rd, and I was 64, just like Paul McCartney. And Jack is holding the hardcover edition, which was like 12 by 12, and it had also a limited edition record with it. And those sold out like 1,100 copies across the U.S. almost immediately. And the record had people like Paul McCartney and Metallica, also Brandy Carlisle. It was a pretty eclectic mix of artists. But why the vinyl record came back makes absolutely no sense. It defies logic, because you can get music for free, especially on YouTube. And actually here in Reykjavik, I don't really subscribe to any of the streaming services because my smart TV has YouTube. And I watch YouTube all day. I mean, and obviously with everything going on in Greenland and all that, there's news going on all day too. But from a music standpoint, it's interesting how the algorithm knows my tastes. So yesterday I was watching a Marianne Faithfull concert, which I was at St. Anne's Church, Blazing Away. I was at that concert and I was able to relive it. I mean, David Bowie, same thing. All kinds of concerts. All my favorite artists are popping up because YouTube is tracking everything I like. So it defies technological grounds, economic grounds. It's very expensive to make a record, much more than it was in the 70s, for example. And from an ecological standpoint, and this is definitely related to what we're doing here in Iceland, PVC is made out of a toxic material. There are toxic materials in that plastic. In fact, Greenpeace calls it the most environmentally harmful plastic. So here's a little bit about my music background. I've met 3 Sex Pistols, but only 2 Beatles. One of the 3 Sex Pistols was Sid Vicious. I was in the elevator with him and his lawyer when he was going to a pretrial hearing. He was going through it. It was just the 3 of us. It was the most bizarre. I knew I couldn't ask him about the case. He was accused of killing his girlfriend. So I said, Sid, have you heard the new Clash album? Which at the time, Give Him Enough Rope just came out. And his lawyer said, don't answer that. And I was like, why not? So the doors opened and then they left in this media circus, So it was, anyway, years later, about 12 years later, I met Steve Jones, the guitar player, and then about 10 years later, 10 years ago, I met John Lydon. I've also taught on the college level for over 40 years. You'll see at the bottom it says Iceland University Arts. That's a little bit stretching. I did a guest lecture there in April 2025. But all these other universities and colleges, I did teach, mostly writing courses. Now this is the last time that Iceland has had, well, I can't say we're pressing records today, but there's a definite plan to get there. From 1979 to 1986, there was a pressing plant here in Iceland. There were all kinds of weird rumors about what happened. Like, supposedly the only reason they started it was because the Europeans were levying really high tariffs. And, tariffs, like, now is a huge issue, right? And then the other rumor was that the equipment, the plant eventually was disassembled and the equipment got thrown into the ocean. which I found out that there's some truth to that. And the reason I found out is Bo Halderson was one of the part owners of this. And he and I had a conversation about a month ago about this whole period. So he said he was flattered that I was so interested in talking to him about his career. And you know, we didn't get into, we were on the phone for about a half hour, but he invited me to, you know, come visit him, you know, after the holidays. So we still have to schedule that. But anyway, one of the records, for example, they did Led Zeppelin. I bought here in Reykjavik a copy of the Rolling Stones Tattoo U that was pressed at Alpha. And they did mostly like greatest hits records, like various artists type thing. I have a bunch of those. They're very plentiful at the thrift stores and also at the flea market down the road. So how did I end up here? As I said, I just sort of fell in love with the whole place. And I brought with me 80 records. That was as much as I could put in my suitcases. And I wasn't going to get, you know, a huge... I mean, I did actually buy a first class ticket so that I could bring 7 suitcases. I brought too many clothes, actually, I realized. I should have like saved more for books and records, you know. So I basically limited it to, I had already bought 50 Icelandic records in my 4 trips in the previous 18 months. So I had a good start of Icelandic music. But I also brought like 30, you know, Western, you know, American English records that I had listened to once maybe, like I really, you know, but I put in to storage dozens of record store day records that I hardly listened to. So, but, and then I actually did, about 6 weeks ago, wrote an article, Record Collecting in Iceland. As John Lennon sang, it's just like starting over. And I also was neglectful not to thank, and I'm doing it now, Valley, our music librarian sitting there behind the desk. This library is an amazing resource. And it's like, the library in New York was one of the things that I miss most, right? But that library didn't have Mojo magazine, all these other great music magazines for you to like even take home with you if you wanted to. They didn't have a CD department or a vinyl department. I mean, it really is a fantastic library. So, okay, getting back to it, how did I end up here? And this is a kind of funny story. I've been doing variations on this speech, this is probably the 10th time, since 2020. And in June, I was doing a speech at Making Vinyl, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But I was reading this business magazine, How to Capture an Audience's Attention. And I was saying, you need to get them right at the very first slide. You really have to, you know, say something outrageous, right? And I'm thinking about that. And I was like, I just finished my PowerPoint, it's boring as hell. And I was like, I wanted to be a Viking when I was a kid. And trust me, I never did drugs. I wonder if like one of my parents dropped me or something like that, and I had like this delayed reaction memory to figure this out. And I also was always very curious about volcanoes. I knew that they existed. And in fact, Life magazine, around 1966, had a pictorial about this island that was born from under the ocean, and it was the underwater volcano. And it was searching. Apparently, I didn't know that that was the name of it, but I remember the photographs. So I wanted to be a Viking. This is my actual school, PS 214 in Queens, and I had to do a book report. So this is interesting. In the 3rd grade, I did a book report about an Eskimo. So then when I found all this stuff when I cleaned out my parents' house after they passed away. And my mother never threw away anything, right? So I'm like thinking, well, maybe I could find the book report about the Viking, right? I wasn't able to. But the funny thing about this is there was an assignment, a good book report, and it says, make it interesting. So, I got that right. So, all right, after I remembered the book report, I guess Google is good for something. I put I put I remembered it was Leif Erikson. Leif Erikson kid's book or something like that. Within 5 minutes I found the book. I mean, I immediately recognized the cover. And the reason I remembered the whole story was because I made a costume. And I had a green army helmet, which for a pacifist, I was like, why did I even have this as a kid? I covered it in tinfoil, and then I took the paper towel roll, covered it in tinfoil, and then I attached it to the helmet, and then I was like, hey, I got horns like, like Leif Erikson. And I must have taken a cape from my, Casper the Friendly Ghost, or something. But my mother apparently was mad at me for unrolling, like ruining her paper towels, and maybe she didn't take a photograph, I don't know. But one of the first books I bought here was The Viking's Guide to Good Business. And by the way, the business that we're creating is called Thermal Beats Records. So I've been around the music business since I was in high school, although I am holding a guitar here and sitting in front of a piano. I did learn how to play guitar when I was 30. I was just like sort of pantomiming here. And but I had friends who actually were signed to Elektra Records. And the funny thing is, everything that could go wrong with a band, and I'm sure Iceland is full of these types of stories, did for this band. They were signed to Elektra Records. The basic story was the A&R woman wanted to go to bed with the lead singer, and he wasn't interested. And when that happened, everything went wrong for the band. This is after like a full page in Billboard announced their signing. I heard the record once, and it was really good. So then I have Facebook to thank. The bass player is the guy with the long, Farrah Fawcett-like shag haircut with the eye on the end. He and I were the closest, and we found each other on Facebook during the pandemic, like in 2020. And then when I moved back to Manhattan in 2021, he was in town because his son was going on auditions. He's an actor. And so I brought my daughter, and we had this reunion. We hadn't seen each other since 1981. And it was really nice. And actually the son got that audition, made a feature-length movie, finished the first season of an Apple Plus story called, Apple Plus sitcom called Stick, about a golf kid, who becomes like this superstar as a teenager. The next season is about to start, actually. I also wrote about music all along, and part of my library is on Rock's back pages, and I've interviewed people like Joey Ramone and Lou Reed, and loads of others as well. I started my record collection in 1973. Introducing the Beatles was the first one. Very soon after, I bought the Rolling Stones Hot Rocks, and then Bob Dylan, like within a month. I had all 3 records, and there was no stopping at that point. I bought the next 3 records I bought were Dylan records. All right, so fast forward to 2017. I came up with this idea for a business-to-business conference that we had a sense that there was a rebirth of an industry. But we didn't know to what extent. But I have to say, and I was standing in the back of the room, and next to my kids being born, it was like the most proud moment I ever had. Like, I come up with this idea, and this is happening. I think I'll have that same sensation when we have the record factory up and running. You know, because again, it was like this thing that just sort of popped in my head. So Jack White was, the planets sort of lined up for this event to happen. He got it immediately, although he didn't give us confirmation he was definitely coming until like 3 weeks before, so it was hard to like promote it. But we filled the ballroom, so that was something. And then actually, the other gentleman here is Daryl McDaniels from Run DMC. He's a great public speaker. Okay, and then growing up in the 60s, you know, I saw how music sort of changed. This is actually the very first record that I ever owned, which was a gift from my grandmother. The World's Fair happened in 1964, which was right near where I grew up. We used to go get it kind of regularly. So my grandmother gave it to both of us. My brother never really cared about records, so I took it. My grandmother also gave me this amazing transistor radio, where I first heard the Beatles. Like, I remember I'll Hold Your Hand, you know, She Loves You, all those great hits. I heard on this little transistor radio. When I was in the 6th grade, we moved to the suburbs, and I was at this, like, I guess what they call the nerd table, and this kid had this mini reel-to-reel tape recorder, and I was just sort of mesmerized by what he could do with it. And so I got some birthday money a few months later, and I went to the department store to see if I could find that tape recorder. And then to have it, but they had a regular cassette recorder, like what the FBI used to use, you know. So I bought that, and I bought this Chuck Berry tape, actually. Okay, so getting back to this record comeback, there's a direct correlation, and this is based on the research I did for the book, between the origins of Record Store Day and the trajectory going up. And it's true this was US numbers, but it's true for Europe and globally as well. And actually the book goes into detail how, you know, Britain was the first non-US country. Well, I guess Canada technically was the first non-US. And then Great Britain, and then France, and, you know, Netherlands, they all wanted to be part of it. So what goes around comes around, and I still haven't said, you know, exactly what happened. You know, how did they get to that point? Okay, so as I said before, fear of missing out is a large part of it. And that photograph on the right was my right, I guess, your left, is this line around the block, and this doesn't even show the whole story, of people waiting to go to Amoeba Records, which was my favorite store in LA. I haven't gone to the new location.
It's fantastic.
And then, what's that?
It's great.
Oh, you've been there?
I've got from there.
Oh.
No, it's great.
So, and then the other photo is a record store from Long Island where I lived from 2012 to 2020, first part of 2020. And actually, on Record Store Day, I did my launch party there at this store. But the reason I have this photo, this guy wanted to make sure he was the first in line, so he plopped himself down at 6 o'clock at night, and the store wasn't opening until 8 o'clock the next morning. And dozens of people came after he did. So if I ever do another edition of that book, I think I want that on the cover. But in the digital age, really, anyone have any guesses where that cartoon is from? Flintstones, exactly. But Emil Berliner in 1888, had basically the same idea, which hasn't really changed that much from how a turntable works today. The main difference is the material. In those days it was shellac. So, as Mark Twain said, the report of my death was an exaggeration. That was true for vinyl because it never really went away. There were DJs that were still getting records pressed. There were audiophile companies there was a small niche of record, stereo aficionados, hi-fi people. In the 60s and 70s, it was like a commodity almost. And somehow everybody made money. It might have been similar to what's going on now with musicians, that the A-list people get the most money, and then there's struggling bands, garage bands, and maybe they don't make as much. By the early 70s, like Led Zeppelin was like the great symbol of this. Touring, they had their own jets. Elton John, in fact, would go to Tower Records in Los Angeles and have them close the store for him, but he would go before the regular opening hours, and he would spend like an hour just buying like 100 records because he could. Like they didn't give it to him, like he did pay for them. And Muhammad Ali had that great 45 thing, which is like it's kind of a hazard when you think about it. And I've seen another Steve McQueen. I've seen a photo of him having it too. So in 1980s, entertainment changed, and video games became very popular. MTV. Did they have MTV in Reykjavik? Iceland? Yeah. Yeah. Like the European version of it, I guess, or was it? Yeah.
I saw Corona in the UK. It was the same.
Okay. And then the Walkman was also a major thing, and it changed, listening patterns. But teenagers really didn't buy records like they did previously because they had all these other pastimes. So the industry realized they had to reinvent themselves. And I don't know, for some reason, I wrote for Billboard a little bit in the 90s. And I saved this one issue because I had a feeling it was going to be a very important article at some point. And what this article is about is that they stopped accepting returns for unsold records. Now, in those days, the record industry was very corrupt. They had two sets of books. There was an adage that it shipped gold but was returned platinum, which mathematically makes absolutely no sense. But they got away with it, and the IRS apparently looked the other way, and that's why you had famous bands like The Who would put out an album that you would think would be very successful, but it would show up in the $1.99 bin because they over manufactured, and then as a result, the bands didn't get royalties on those cutouts. It was a really bad situation. So when they were, let me just get into a little bit more numbers. So 1984, the LP peaked in terms of people, in terms of units sold, but and then after that, from 85 to 91, the cassette was actually the most popular configuration. And I remember very specifically wanting to buy Little Creatures, the then new Talking Heads album, on LP, and they said, we don't have it, but you could get the cassette. And I was like, I really didn't want the cassette, but I bought it, and wasn't that happy about it. But so now the CD itself actually was introduced at least in 1983. So they told the retailers, we will accept returns on the CD, but not the LP. So it basically cemented the death of the LP. The retailers like, well, we don't want to take a chance on, a record that we can't return. So, but you'll do it with the CD. All right, we'll get beyond the CD. That's basically how it, how that for a while, they made a lot of money. It all stopped when Napster reared its ugly head, and people were able to download everything for nothing. And the funny thing is, in the U.S., the Recording Industry Association of America thought that DAT, digital audio tape, was going to be the big thing. So they spent years negotiating royalties for blank media, and they never considered that the home computer would have like a disk drive in it that they could copy music that way. So they were just asleep at the wheel, really. By the way, the Media Line was a magazine that I edited, the CD and DVD production thing. It was a great job. I had it for 8 years. And we used to have in the magazine a section called the Dead Media, and occasionally we put the vinyl articles in there. And in 2002, this friend of mine said, Bob Irwin had a label called Sundays, and he told me, vinyl is coming back, I guarantee it. And I thought he was absolutely crazy. And at that time, he also worked for Sony, reissuing box sets and things like that. He was also an engineer, so he remastered and things. So I said, okay, And then I had interviewed the record producer Phil Ramone, who produced everybody from Billy Joel to Frank Sinatra. He basically, said, well, the CD had a pretty good run, And then Apple's iPod and iTunes, they were sort of like this middle ground, waiting for a streaming service. And I understand here you had a short-lived streaming service called GoGo Yoko. I'm anxious to hear more about that, because they had really good ideas to properly pay the musicians, which they're obviously not getting from Spotify. Now, full disclosure, I own the copyright to a song that is copyrighted with the U.S. Copyright Office as well as BMI. I'm hoping one day it will become a hit, But it wasn't a song that I wrote. But my friend actually, he lent some money from me. He was going to get thrown out of his apartment. So he said, I don't, he says, I don't know if I could ever repay you. So meanwhile, he had given me a CD of his music that some label was interested in. He says, listen to this, tell me what you like. And in the middle of it was like this amazing Spanish ballad. And I said to him, you remember you said you didn't know how you repay me? I want to write straight up song, but I'll split it with you, Like I don't want the whole thing, half of it. So he said, okay. So 2005 and 2006 was a horrible year for Tower Records when they went out of business, but also for me because my magazine died and I was unemployed. But around that same time, these indie record stores were saying, well, do we still have a business? Or is it an opportunity of sorts? So some of them said, we sell comic books as well as records, and the comic book publishers give away free comic books one day a year. Maybe we should do something along those lines. So then they said, yeah, but records are kind of expensive to make. Can we really afford that? But anyway, they had this convention of sorts in Baltimore, and what was really strange about it is they left to the very last day on Saturday morning this meeting that like less than 12 people showed up. And record store day is similar to what Woodstock. Like everyone claimed they were there, but you wonder if they really were. And so I researched and spoke to as many of those 12 people, most of them, who said they were there. And I got some different stories. Like they thought that somebody from this company was there, but it turned out to be their colleague. And at the same time, like the 10 or 12 people who were there at this meeting unanimously said, yeah, what do we have to lose? We might as well try it. Yeah. And it took them a while to settle on the name Record Store Day, but it worked out. So the no LP returns killed vinyl in 1991, but when Michael Kurtz, who is the co-founder of Record Store Day, went to the labels and said, we want to bring back vinyl. So the label said, it's a one-way transaction. We are not going to accept, returns. So the retailers better, know what they want. So it sort of resurrected it. It turned out to be a very good strategy. And it changed the economics from what it was in the 70s and 80s. They couldn't really keep the 2 sets of books anymore. Everything had to be up and up. And it worked, actually, It's surprising to even the co-founders of Record Store Day that it worked, because they admit in the book they had no idea what they were doing. And so one of the quotes is from a Sony Music International senior vice president. He said, he was talking about vinyl, I saw it dying, I saw it dead, and I saw it rising from the grave. So why vinyl was returned, it's these 3 things, I think. In 2007, there was this campaign that only about 100 record stores actually made it apparent that record stores are cool. Some media actually started covering it. It was a cool place to hang out, learn about life, new music, meet friends, bandmates, potential romantic partners. And in fact, one of my favorite parts of the book is in Chicago, that these 2 DJs actually were going on an internet date. And it was at the record store that they had their first date. And then they ended up getting married in that same store. And that the limited editions would quickly sell out and then become valuable collectibles on eBay, which drives Record Store Day crazy, that they don't have any control over the resale. And then, as I said before, the CDs made it possible. And then I guess you could go forth about the pandemic as well. But the changing demographics are really also an interesting thing, because in the early plateau, going back up, it was baby boomers like myself who were recapturing their youth. And I'm among that. And I actually found a record store that was my hangout place. It was just like the old days when I was a teenager. And the woman with the face mask is my daughter, actually. She is a vinyl collector as well. And my book is actually dedicated to her and her brother. My son doesn't really care about records, but in the dedication I say, Annie will, get this amazing collection, but Jake has his first dibs on all the Black Sabbath records, even if he just puts it up on the wall. Because he and I went to a Black Sabbath concert once. But the numbers actually show that the demographics shifted, and that women were actually fueling a lot of the growth, especially Taylor Swift. So in 2022, you would see, there's Michael Jackson, the Beatles, and Fleetwood Mac. But the rest of them are all millennial, Gen Z favorites. The same thing in 2023, she dominated the charts, Taylor Swift. 1 out of every 15 albums was hers. This is just the US. Then, in 2024, she broke sales records again. She was also, by the way, the ambassador of Record Store Day, the year that my book came out in 2022. And I thought I was going to finally get to meet Taylor Swift. Not that I really wanted to. My daughter is a Swiftie. so they wouldn't let me anywhere near. So, and it's funny because there was a press conference that Metallica participated in Los Angeles. I was never a big Metallica fan, so I mean, if it was like Elton John or Taylor Swift, something like that, they wouldn't be able to keep me away. So I was like, all right, you want to handle that? Good. So to give you an idea of how the industry has changed, in the 2017, when I came up with this idea for making vinyl, there were only 35 vinyl pressing plants on both sides of the Atlantic. And now there are about 200. Actually, this is a little out of date. And the biggest plants, to keep up with the pandemic boom, expanded dramatically. And in fact, there was waiting times of as much as a year to put in an order before you actually got delivery. That's been cut down dramatically to like a month or 6 weeks at the most, which is a good thing. But making vinyl is a complicated, expensive process. And this schematic is not, illustration is not that far-fetched from the truth of how complicated it really is to make a record. And notice there's like a boiler there with a bunch of coal on there. One of the beauties about doing this in Iceland is that electricity is so cheap because of the geothermal power that we immediately, we don't eliminate completely, we still have to pay for some electricity, but it's a lot less hit on the bottom line than record factories everywhere else. And our equipment's going to be all electric machines, so it takes advantage of that, and we cut out like some major steps. And you notice like this stuff looks like it's dripping. It basically is toxic stuff, that PVC. And we have an answer to that as well. So for me, this Iceland journey began in September 2022. I was in Germany for one of our European events, and it was the first time I heard of a plant-based material. And I was thinking to myself, it was described as 100% fossil fuel free. And I knew sustainability was a topic that the industry, especially the EU, were moving towards. So I was thinking to myself, well, plant-based, that's kind of a new thing, So meanwhile, I had switched planes from Amsterdam to Jaffee, and I drove back to the Netherlands with a friend of mine, and then I was in Eindhoven. I was actually going to do a research project, a Fulbright fellowship about sustainable record manufacturing, because there was a lot of activity in the Netherlands. And there were these two universities that liked the project, so they were going to back me. And so I visited them, and then I was coming back via Amsterdam through Jaffee. And well, let me play this more about the sugar beets.
Good morning, I'm Rachel Martin. The vinyl industry has made a major comeback in recent years. The one downfall, records are made from a plastic called PVC, which is bad for the environment. So, a company called Evolution Music is trying to fix this problem. It says it's created the world's first bioplastic vinyl record. It's made from sugar and starches. This material can allow people to enjoy their favorite artists without worrying about toxic waste, just vibes. It's Morning Edition.
So the brilliant thing about this material is that it doesn't require new equipment. It can be used on existing pressing machines. It can be played back on any turntable. Those of you who came early I was playing the record that we made for Airwaves last year. So we sort of proved the concept with that record. And actually, I have another one here. This one was put out by an organization called Earth Percent. There were actually 4 different records. Brian Eno is the head of this organization. On this particular record, this version of this record, Nile Rodgers and Chic, the soul, the R&B band. On the other side, Coldplay has a track. Churches and Robert Smith from The Cure is on another one. And then Eno's own music was on one of the other records. And you have to say, Eno's like, one of these purists. Would he endorse something like this if he didn't think it was good? So, meanwhile, we're landing in Jaffee. I'm looking at the terrain and I'm just like, what is this place? Meanwhile, the in-flight entertainment is knocking me out. I'm just saying, I'm going from genre to genre, taking notes of the records I want to buy, and then, like this, Binya. Anyone know her? So she was an example of somebody who I thought was really good. And I said to myself, if, any place that might need another record factory might be Iceland. So then I found out I didn't get the Fulbright, right? I was a finalist, but I didn't get it. So I was like, what am I going to do now? Because I knew I wanted to leave the U.S. So I was like, what about that Iceland idea? So I started doing research, and then I'm making vinyl in June 2024. I'm doing this panel with Gummy from RPM Records. Are there any musicians here who might have used, did you ever use RPM?
No.
No? Okay. So so Gummy says to me, I said, do you ever think about, I'm looking at his bio, I knew he had a factory in Copenhagen. I said, do you ever think about doing one in Iceland? Because he was born in Reykjavik. So he said, no, but I already send 1,000 records to Iceland every month, so I'm thinking here's a supply chain coming in, and then, so that was and then he said, tell me if this is true. 1 out of 3 Icelanders are musicians, and they're in 5 bands, and they all love records. That's true? Okay. So it's not a factoid. It's probably pretty close to accurate. I think, from a per capita standpoint, there's not any place in the world that has this level of creativity, really. And it's more than just music. I think the arts as well, all types of art. So the interesting thing about that trip, the previous year, when I first decided I wanted to come back to Iceland, was I bought this record at Rough Trade in London, and I didn't know that he pressed this RPM Records, at that point. And what was interesting, so this was the score to Greta Thunberg's documentary about her. So it was the music, but everything about this release was as green as it could get at that stage. So even the vinyl was recycled vinyl, it wasn't pure stuff. So then, even on the Rough Trade sticker, it's interesting where they put the price. It's an interesting thing they also marked it down from £19.99 to $4.99. And I was like, I would have paid full price for that one, because I knew it was kind of unusual. And one of my goals for Thermal Beats is to basically press a record of Greta's speeches, which Björk actually used in her concert, before she came on stage. so, so Gummy and I became fast friends. Okay. 4 months later, we're doing another making vinyl in Europe, in Haarlem, Netherlands. The guy with the beard, Kevin, he was also in Minneapolis, right? But we were both so busy, I didn't get to talk to him because I was going to run it by him too. What did you think? The reason I wanted Kevin to weigh in was because he built 26 factories around the world. I figure if anybody knows if this is a good idea, it's probably him, right? So then when I corner him, right after he's having this conversation, I took a picture of him. He says, I had the same idea you did. He says, when I saw you 4 months before in Minneapolis, I had 24 hours layover in Reykjavik, went to the record shops, went to the nightclubs. He goes, and then he says, I just became Evolution Music's technical director. That's the company that made the plant-based material. I was like, the planets are lining up for this thing to happen. So then I said to Kev, I said, yeah, Gumendar, and he goes, you mean Gummy? So I was like, I didn't know that, that was his nickname. All right, so the next 3 months, we hatch out this plan. What are we going to call the company? We had a big fight over whether we should call it Beats, as in B-E-A-T-S. And I was the one that was saying, we should be like specific, I mean, why not? Obviously the thermal comes from the geothermal power. Eventually, Gummy actually changed his mind. I mean, I was like kind of shocked. He texted me, he goes, you're right, let's do that. And then he created a logo. So meanwhile, Kevin's like the real technologist. I mean, he understands the science of this plant-based material. And one of our secret weapons is he is the only individual in the world who knows how to retrofit the plates to make it accommodate this material. So the plant-based material consumes 30% less energy if the factory switches over entirely to the plant-based material. To date, I mean, there are a couple other factories that are experimenting with the material, but we're the only one that we said, that's all we're going to do. And we decided to, and then also the cycle times are 50% lower to press a record with Evo. And as I said before, the electricity is such a major fixed cost, but it will be minimal here because of geothermal. Okay, so we decide the three of us are going to come to Iceland. And we stopped off in Grindavik. And the rocks were still warm. This was like a month before the last eruption, right? And the funny thing is, I figured, and they said like it could go again any day, right? And sure enough, 2 days after I left, a week later, it went off again. I missed it again. But anyway, our first business meeting, let me also say, we added a fourth co-founder a few months later, J.B. Bergson, guitarist in a band called Pink Street Boys. Their record actually is there in the stats over there. So I spent New Year's Eve with him and his family. This is a little boy over here. They were on the cover of Grapevine in 2015. So we added a fourth member, and he's a boat engineer, but he was thinking about possibly opening a factory. So the three of us come here in March of 2024, and then Kevin comes back for Innovation Week, and then we figured out that it was JB who was thinking about the factory. So Kevin sort of like vetted him because we needed somebody to manage the factory. And so, Kevin checked to see what kind of electricity knowledge he has, And I remember Kevin says to Gummy and I, he's perfect, All right, so our first business meeting was right outside of Jaffee at something called the Eco Business Bar. This cement building was unfinished in 2008 because of the economic collapse. It was going to be an aluminum smelter, and it was a very controversial idea to do this. And in fact, Bjork, I understand, was protesting against this. You know, Alcoa had already established a big aluminum smelter. And then Bjork and Sigur Rós did a concert, against this type of environmental, just slumbering, just like, really harming the environment, and they did a concert in Reykjavik. Anybody at that concert? And then the Torah concert? You were there? Yeah. And so it's something that we hope Roof actually broadcasted. There's about 5 minutes on YouTube from the concert. So we're hoping maybe eventually make that record if it's possible. So the head of the Eco Business Park explained that his background was the fishing industry. And he explained that we wanted to repurpose this building. The government eventually bought it. It was just sitting there. And we wanted to do it ecological type businesses here. And he said, we're known for our culture, but we didn't have anybody, and we heard about you. So, of course, we had druthers. We probably would rather be in Reykjavik, closer to the music, but there's music in Jaffee as well. But one of the good things about this place is there's that green area of grass in between the two horseshoe, and they said that potentially could be like a concert venue, like for festivals and things like that. So we're going to hold them to that. And then, the second meeting was with Siggy Balderson from the Sugar Cubes. And I bought the very first Sugar Cube CD, so I knew them. I didn't keep on following them, and I never saw them live. I didn't tell Siggy that, but I certainly knew Bjork's music. I didn't really buy a lot of it, but like through osmosis, I was surprised how much of it I really knew. And so Siggy said to us, I think you're mad doing this, but I think you're geniuses as well. I think you're going to be very successful if you stick with it. So then he invited me to his Christmas show, and then having Sugar Beet LP's sound, and Abbey Road Studios producer was speechless that it was not a regular vinyl record, and then PMC is a studio monitor manufacturer. That CEO was so impressed, he actually invested in Evolution. And then the other good thing about Eco Records, and I mentioned Taylor Swift, and kids are more willing to pay more for an Eco record than older demographics, which is but I mean, even the older demographics, they don't believe that climate change is a hoax, So we realize it's going to be a gradual type of thing. And one of the things we're trying to do now is get recognition from the government that the existing music fund law, they allow the recording studio customers to get 25% back if they record at an Icelandic recording studio. Well, we'd rather have them also, press their record here in Iceland if that's an option. Those customers of ours should be getting a 25% rebate too, and that should probably level off the difference of going overseas. And one of the things I've had to grow used to is I'm paying more for new records than when I was paying in the US. Now with the tariffs, I don't know what the situation is there. But, so the scalability, I mean, the investors want to know Yeah, but how are you going to make enough money for us to be, Iceland's a small country. They're not wrong about that. But we're making this as a model for the rest of the world. And that the three majors, Universal, Sony, and Warner, have all said, we need to lower our carbon footprints. That's 85% of the world's music. And I've already had a meeting with the Universal and Warner. Haven't met yet with Sony, but they're interested in what we're doing. So in Airwaves of 2024, for the 25th anniversary, we made our first record. That's this one. And you might know some of these artists here. Actually, so far I've seen Virgin Orchestra and Space Station, and I met Cola actually at, I also met Clemens. Gummy actually came up with this idea. This year I guess we started too late, we didn't get it done. But instead what we did in 2025 was three things. We registered the company to do business here, which was important. Then we worked on my immigration, which was also very important. Because I was willing to leave, move here full time. Gummy wants to stay in Copenhagen. Kevin wants to stay based in England and come in as needed. Especially when the equipment gets delivered, he'll assemble it and stay here as long as it takes. So we're in fundraising mode. If you want to learn more about Thermal Beats, you can use the QR code. And also, if you're interested in getting a PDF of my book, I will email you that if you give me your email address. You can write it down here. Any questions?
That park is in what, like Grindavik, or is it?
Grindavik.
Okay, yeah. And you have people working there?
I don't, but Eco Business Park does have some tenants already. In fact, there's a Japanese strawberry grower.
Mm-hmm.
So, now later, I have one other thing I could show you that talks more about thermal beats, and my voice is going a little bit, so and I have competition out there.
Yeah.
The music industry has this huge kind of hidden environmental problem. Today, we're going to dig into how one company is solving it. And their secret weapon, you're not going to believe it, it's a vegetable. This is a story of Thermal Beats Records. You can't deny it, right? In this age of streaming and digital everything, the vinyl record has made this incredible comeback. There's just something so special about that whole experience. The giant artwork, reading the liner notes, the whole ritual of dropping the needle. It's a real physical connection to the music we love. And look, this isn't some small niche thing. We're talking a projected 112 million new LPs sold in 2024 alone. That's a market worth over $3.4 billion. The vinyl renaissance is absolutely real. But, and this is a big but, underneath that warm, crackly sound, there's a huge environmental cost that most of us just don't think about. And this quote right here from Professor Kyle Devine, man, it just completely reframes the whole thing. He's saying that music isn't just watching from the sidelines. It's an active contributor to petrocapitalism. And the main culprit? Well, it's the very plastic that makes a record spin. Okay, so let's really pull back the curtain here and talk about vinyl's dirty little secret. For all its awesome analog warmth, the traditional record has a surprisingly dark environmental footprint, and it's one the industry just can't ignore anymore. So get this. Every single year, the vinyl industry chews through over 30,000 tons of PVC, polyvinyl chloride. And just to put that in perspective for you, Greenpeace has called PVC one of the most environmentally damaging plastics out there, period. All right, this chart breaks it down for us. A whopping 50%, half of a record's carbon footprint comes from the PVC plastic itself. Another 30% comes from all the energy needed to press it. So, to really fix this problem, you can't just tweak things. You have to totally reinvent the material and the process. But what if somebody could do just that? Well, the answer is coming from a place you might not expect, Iceland. Okay, say hello to Thermal Beats Records. Their vision is, well, it's pretty revolutionary. They want to transform a humble sugar beet into a high-fidelity record, and do it all inside a futuristic factory that's powered by the Earth itself. So what is Thermal Beats Records, really? It's the world's very first record pressing plant that's designed to be totally 100% fossil fuel free. They're attacking the problem from both sides, swapping out toxic PVC for a plant-based material and powering the whole thing with Iceland's natural geothermal energy. Okay, that all sounds incredible, right? But how does it actually work? Let's break down the two main pillars of their strategy, this revolutionary new material and their unique energy source. Okay, first up, the material. It's called EvoVinyl, and it's a bioplastic that comes from sugar beets and starches. The benefits here are huge. It's 100% plant-based, has zero toxic chemicals like dioxins or phthalates, and get this, it cuts the carbon emissions over its life by 85%. And this is the real kicker, the part that's so important for music lovers. It has 100% audio fidelity. Rigorous tests have shown you literally cannot tell the difference in sound quality between it and premium PVC. Now, the other half of this amazing equation is all about location, location, location. They're not just building this factory anywhere. They picked Iceland for some very, very smart reasons. So why Iceland? I mean, what's so special about it? Well, first off, the whole country runs on 100% renewable energy from geothermal and hydropower. So that just wipes out that 30% of emissions from the factory right off the bat. It also has this world-famous music scene with artists like Bjork and Sigur Rós, which creates a built-in local market. Throw in strong government support for green ideas and a really unique tourism angle, and you've got the perfect place for this idea to grow. And you know, this support goes all the way to the top. Iceland's president, Hala Tómasdóttir, isn't just an official supporter, she's a local and a huge record collector herself. I mean, that's just a fantastic layer of local pride for the project. But what's really cool here is that the vision for Thermal Beats is so much bigger than just making a green product. They're trying to create an entirely new, sustainable system from the ground up. So this is what they call their circular manufacturing model. Let me walk you through it. It all starts with sustainably sourced sugar beets. They get processed in the geothermal powered factory. Any waste or bad pressings, they get composted. And that compost puts nutrients back into the soil to grow more crops. It's this beautiful closed-loop regenerative process. It completely flips the script on that old take, make, waste model. And they've got a really ambitious but super clear 5-year plan to make it all happen. Year 1 is all about proving the concept right there at home. By year 4, they're planning to export the whole model as a consulting service. And the ultimate goal, by year 5, this incredible farm-to-factory loop where they're growing the beets in a geothermal greenhouse right next to the factory. Okay. Of course, a vision this big, it needs funding, right? To get the factory built and get operations off the ground, they're looking for 1.5 million euros. But as you're about to see, the numbers show this is way more than a passion project. It's a really solid business case. And this is really the key takeaway from a business perspective. This isn't just a feel-good environmental project, it's a seriously viable business. By controlling the whole process and using that sustainable energy, they're projecting a gross profit margin of 48.5% on every record. And that super healthy margin, well, it's projected to bring in a net profit of over 935,000 euros by just the end of their second year. I mean, this is powerful proof that you don't have to pick one or the other. Sustainability and profitability can absolutely go hand in hand. So when you step back and look at the whole thing, what does this all really mean for the bigger picture? It's about so much more than just one factory. It's about totally reimagining the future of how music gets made. Look, at the end of the day, Thermal Beats isn't just building a factory. They are creating a blueprint, a roadmap that the entire music industry could follow. As more and more of us demand sustainable products, they're not just selling a greener record, they're selling a solution. And this quote from Iceland's trade commissioner really just ties it all together perfectly. He sees this project as a perfect match for Iceland's export strategy and their climate goals. A model for how a country can use its unique strengths to build a whole new green industry. So this whole story leaves us with a pretty powerful question. The vinyl record is like this icon of 20th century plastic. So if we can reinvent that and make it clean, circular, and sustainable, you gotta ask yourself, what industry is next?
Okay. And then I just said I wanted to show you record getting pressed. This is just 26 seconds. So this is how the machine works. And this was actually pressed in England. You know, it's very robotic. There's also manual machines our business plan calls to have a manual machine for those small runs and then a larger, and this was the playback. And when Kevin was doing all this, this was like the moment of truth. I had a lot of, variety in terms of the oils. Was that again?
Sugar beet is just beetroot, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, it was funny because
I was
when
like,
we
sugar?
received the memorandum of understanding, they called it beetroot, and then I realized that was the translation.
Yeah, because
So-
the
so-
sugar beet
yeah,
makes
yeah,
it sound
yeah.
like it's made out of candy.
No, it's a vegetable.
And I'm like, whoa.
Starches, beetroot, yeah, beetroot.
So I know we have to wrap up. Does anyone have any more questions?
Did you get capital funding yet?
No, we're working on it.
Okay.
I had a very positive meeting on Friday. We'll see where it leads.
Good luck.
And I had meetings yesterday, another one today. Everyone's giving me more prospects to talk to.
Fantastic.
So, yeah, I mean, this is the first time in 13 years I'm not teaching. Like the last 2 months from here, I taught a virtual class for New York University. And I was like, I'm going to just work on this. Yeah. And I have to renew my residency in June, start the process. So, yeah, hopefully we'll have the money by then.
Yeah.
UTL.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, startups aren't done overnight. I mean,
No, they're
it
not.
takes, So I think the government will understand.
Well, I mean, just for the local market, because if you think about it, my boyfriend's got like 100 records printed by Gumi, which he has to then get shipped here
Yeah.
and then shipped out. So there's so much